Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Left wing.
Where I can't understand how you have a two-tier system within a caucus. You're making an offer to the Canadian public. You're saying this is what we stand for. The NDP's been clear on this. We know who we are.
Right wing.
That is not what the Canadian public care about. The Canadian public don't care about the maneuvers in Parliament and the wording of various motions.
Somewhere in the middle lies the truth.
The bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. This is one of the most important realizations about society you will ever have.
What you think you know may not be so. This is the Political Paradox Podcast.
Hey, good day. This is the Political Paradox Podcast. You can find us online at politicalparadox.ca. My name is Paulie Sy. It's kind of a play on words. I was talking to a coworker a couple of years ago and mentioned something about the Libertarian Party, and he said, man, you know a lot about politics, and I'm going to call you Paulie Sy. And my name is Paul, so it's, kind of a play on words. And of course, if you're a student at university, you're taking political science, which is Paulie Sy for short. So, I don't know, maybe I'll use that as the nickname here on the show. So this is the Political Paradox Podcast, episode 001. And I've been thinking for a while about turning the blog into a podcast. And what kind of put me over the edge is recently I found out that 2 of the 3 Canadian-based libertarian podcasts that I was aware of are no longer on the air. So I wanted to do something to kind of advance the voice of liberty in Canada. You don't hear, there aren't a lot of Canadian-based libertarian podcasts, and so that's another reason. There just weren't that many to begin with. And so here we go. The Political Paradox Podcast, episode 001. And so what I thought I'd do today is do an episode on what is a libertarian, because it's one of those buzzwords that you hear around a lot. There's a lot of talk, but what exactly does it mean? And even those who have heard the word and do know a little bit about what it means, often have the wrong idea. So, and this is just as I see it, but libertarians are a group of people who believe that government is too big. Not just a little too big, but way too big. And that whenever government steps in to solve whatever problem they want to solve, whether it's, regulate the airline industry or ATM fees or whatever the hot topic of the week is, quite often, not only do these policies not end up working efficiently, but in many cases, they actually make the problem worse in sort of a political paradox. Did you see what I did there? Which is why I love the name of this website and the name of this blog, because political paradox describes, to me anyway, so much of what's wrong with government policy. Government policy, I mean, they're well intended at the time, no doubt, but just so many times it has the absolute opposite effect of its original intended purpose. And I'm not saying that libertarians have the answer. We don't know what the answer is. That's kind of the whole point. And there's a lot of kind of arguing within the libertarian movement about, what should government do and what should government not do. But all we know is that it can't possibly be worse than what we have in place right now, where government is trying to run everything, is trying to do, 200 things at once, and just is doing just such a mediocre job at all of them. Libertarians believe that government should focus on, a handful of things and do those things well, like the protection of our borders, the protection of our citizens against each other, like the real thugs that are on the street, every person's right to a fair trial, that sort of thing. Libertarians also believe that everybody should be able to live their life as they see fit, provided you do not infringe on the right of others to do the same. So you don't tell me what to do in my house, and I won't tell you what to do in your house, whether it's, who you sleep with in your bed, whether you smoke in your house or not. Now, if the smoke comes into my place, which sometimes with smoke is kind of difficult to do, but that's, so I don't care what you do in your house as long as it doesn't infringe on, what I want to do in my house. Live and let live. Now, there's a couple of principles which I have identified, which you need to understand and probably need to believe in order to be a libertarian. The first one is the government doesn't have any money. You'll hear, friends or coworkers or just, news reports talk about, the government is going to pay for, 25% of this sports arena, or a government is going to fund this or that or the other. But where does government get the money from in the first place? It is taken forcefully from taxpayers. And that's another key libertarian principle is what libertarians call the non-aggression principle. Basically, it just means don't force people to do things that they don't want to do, whether it's through taxation, whether it's through some sort of, bylaw, or whether it's literally putting a gun to your head. Like, sometimes you'll see with the police force, like, literally putting a gun to somebody's head by force. So, because the government doesn't have any money, by default, every dollar that is spent by government is a dollar that's not spent somewhere else. This whole idea that if money wasn't spent by the government, that it wouldn't be spent at all is ridiculous. If it's the night before payday, and I notice that I have $50 in my account, I'm probably saying, hey, honey, I have an extra $50 in my account. Let's go out to dinner. Or maybe I'll make an extra payment on my credit card, that sort of thing. So this whole idea that if money wasn't spent by government, that it wouldn't be spent at all is simply ridiculous. Now, one of the most common counter arguments you're going to get against this is, the multiplier effect. I was on an online forum a few months ago, and I was talking about how government doesn't actually create jobs. All it can really do is move a job from one location to another. And he got all upset and tore into me. Oh, no, you have the multiplier effect, which basically states that if government gives money to an upstart small business, for instance, and that injection of money from the government is just what that small business needs to get over the hump and go in and do big and great things, and they end up contributing to the economy and end up creating thousands of jobs in the economy, how can you say that that original injection of government money was not a good thing? But what people like this forget is that whatever that statistic is, like 4 out of 5 small businesses fail in the first 5 years. So yeah, maybe that government injection did help with that one business, but you're forgetting about the other 4 times that government gave money to business and they just went belly up anyway. In fact, if anything, you kept that business open longer than it should have because, it was not providing a product or service that the people wanted. So libertarians believe in the power of free markets. And there's a lot of controversy about that, the big corporate fat cats. And I mean, we'll get into that in future episodes about how capitalism is not the horrible boogeyman system that so many people like filmmaker Michael Moore, for instance, try to tell you that it is. The second principle that I've identified, that in order to be thinking like a libertarian, you really have to understand, is the government double standard. There are so many things that happen within government that, if happened in the private sector, would be considered the worst tragedies of humanity. And to use an example that one of my libertarian idols, a guy named Tom Woods, by the way, if you have not checked out this guy, there's lots of YouTube videos with him. He has a daily podcast, which is fantastic, TomWoodsRadio.com. So to use an example that Tom Woods uses, if you go shopping and you're going to buy a sweater and, one little thread is out of place on that sweater, oh boy, is that salesman going to hear about it. Yet when these things happen within government, we just let it go. We accept mediocrity in government. We have a healthcare system in this country where you got to wait 6 months to a year just to get a simple MRI, where dogs and cats can get an MRI the next day. In some cases, using those literally those exact same machines. Our healthcare system has a horrible record for things like leaving surgical tools inside patients accidentally. When it comes to education, we have so many students who are graduating high school now who don't even have basic reading skills, and we just put up with it. Yet, if there's a long lineup at Walmart, like if there were like a 2-hour long lineup at Walmart and they only have one till open, or McDonald's was leaving hooks in your Filet-O-Fish sandwich, there would be protests, there would be boycotts, the national news would be there with an under-camera investigation. Yet when these things happen in government, we just let it go. And so there are so many things that happen in government that, if done in the private sector, would just not be accepted and aren't accepted. But when it comes to government, we just somehow let it go. And you need to stop thinking that way. We need to be critical of government. Now, I can go into, and I have a big interest in the media, and I have a lot of knowledge on the inside working of the news media about why they cover certain stories and whatnot. And I'll certainly do a few episodes on why the media doesn't cover certain stories and why the media doesn't ask the right questions. But that's another show for another time. Now, I want to talk for a few minutes about my journey towards becoming a libertarian, because I wasn't always quite this way. Now, I always was kind of a small government kind of guy. Going back, to high school, 15 years ago, I ended up voting conservative, which is the problem that a lot of people run into. People who really do want smaller government end up voting conservative. But the problem is, and when I realized this, I was well on my way, that particularly when it comes to conservatives, what they say during an election campaign and what they do once they're elected are completely different. And that's one thing that libertarians really believe, is that there really is no difference between the main political parties. All they're really arguing about is whether government should grow at 3%, 4%, or 5% a year. So when I heard about the Libertarian Party, 5 or 6 years ago, who is small government economically and small government on personal issues, I said, now this is an ideology I can embrace. Now, one of my passions in life, as you might have guessed, is politics. But another big passion of mine is radio. I've always loved radio, and back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I used to listen to a guy, he's retired now, named Art Bell. He hosts, the program is still on today. It's called Coast to Coast AM. It's hosted by another guy now. But Art Bell one night, and they still replay some old Art Bell shows on Saturday nights. So about 6 or 7 years ago, on one of those Saturday night replays, they played an interview from back in 1996 from a guy named Harry Brown. Now, Harry Brown ran for president in the U.S. twice, in 1996 and again in 2000. And I'm listening to this interview, and it's a 3-hour long interview. It was a radio show where you were really able to talk to people and get in depth, and we're able to keep them on phone for an extended period of time. So it was like a 3-hour long interview, and I remember listening to this guy, Harry Brown, and he seemed remarkably sensible on many issues. I didn't agree with all of it at the time. I have since come over to pretty much all of it, but he seemed pretty reasonable and had an answer for everything, and truly believed what he was saying. And again, I agreed with a lot of what he was saying, so I did more investigation into him, and unfortunately, I found out that Harry Brown died 7 or 8 years ago. I wish I would have known about him when he was alive, but unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But from there, I kind of moved on. I discovered Milton Friedman, for instance, famous economist, and people like John Stossel, for instance. I'm also a little bit influenced by. One thing I like about him is you might know him from ABC News. He spent years at 2020. ABC News doing these investigative reports. And he used to be, going back many, many years, a consumer reporter. He would be talking about, how companies are ripping you off and, government needs to step in and fix things. But then he had a realization as well, and then and he won awards for his investigative journalism, investigating these companies who supposedly care about nothing but their profits and don't care about their customers. And then he had a realization because he was watching all of these stories that he was doing as they were progressing over time, over many, many years, and some of which government policy was brought in to fix these problems, and the problems weren't being fixed. As I said earlier, government policy often has completely the opposite effect of what is originally intended. So John kind of became a little bit more critical of government and started turning his investigative skills onto the corruption in government. And then all of his fellow journalists turned on him, which, again, I'll go into more detail in another episode about why the media is so pro-government. I'm still trying to figure some pieces of the puzzle out, but I think I figured a lot of it out. So John Stossel, he's not on 2020 anymore. He has a show on Fox Business in the United States, which we can't get here in Canada, but, shows are posted up on YouTube. And from there, I discovered, as I mentioned earlier, Tom Woods, and there's a few other people who I, kind of look up to, and it's a constant learning process too. I'm not one of these people who, I pretend to know everything about everything, and I don't want to use big words. I find a lot of people who try to impress you, use big words in an effort to kind of, make you believe that they know what they're talking about because you don't know what the words are. And so it's a learning process. And so, I'm hoping to do this podcast. I'm going to start doing it once a month. And if I start getting some listeners and become kind of a little bit more passionate about it, of course I can always up the frequency of it. The thing is with me is I get really excited about something for, a few days or a week. And then after maybe a month or so, I kind of lose interest in it. That's kind of what happened with the blog. I haven't posted a blog posting in about 6 months. I was going to post one when this whole Ferguson, Missouri thing was going down. And I just never got the blog up, but there's some interesting stuff I saw on CNN one Saturday night when they were covering the Ferguson stuff. So so I'm hoping to do this podcast once a month, and I want to keep the episodes fairly short. That's another thing about a lot of podcasts that I listen to is they're too long. They're like an hour and a half or 2 hours long. And not only do I have the time to listen to a big podcast like that, and if I do have the time, I end up listening to it in over the course of 2 or 3 days. And I kind of lose where I am in the discussion because they're referring to something I heard the previous day because, and the other thing is I don't have the attention span for it. So I think the ideal length of a podcast is 20 to 30 minutes. Anybody out there who's thinking about starting a podcast, 20 to 30 minutes, I think, is a good length. So it's something that hopefully I can commit to. It doesn't take an awful lot of time, especially if I'm doing it once a month, and won't take a lot of time for you to listen to either. We're just talking 20 or 30 minutes once a month. Kind of a bite-size snippet of libertarian thought in Canada. So that's kind of what I'm about, and I hope you enjoyed our first episode. This is the Political Paradox podcast. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, check out the musings on my blog. If I have something to say, I'll put it up there at www.politicalparadox.ca, and you can get podcast episodes on there as well. This is Paulie Tsai signing off. Talk to you later.